Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's been a crazy week for us. I want to just start by welcoming everyone to what I think is now our fourth environmental community town hall hosted by our nonprofit consortium and the foundation's 13th environmental convening on the refinery over the past 10 years. On behalf of board and staff of St. Croix Foundation, as well as our environmental sector partners, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this important and long overdue informational gathering. I'm going to try to do some table setting and framing for our conversation tonight. And I have to start with a little joke that, all of us, when we're planning these events, we all have our roles, and I'm typically the cautious one, the sentinel. Frandel, not so much. And somehow today, we had a Freaky Friday moment where I was being a little too radical and she had to temper me. But I feel like I have a lot to say, and I'm torn between being really tactful and offering pleasantries on the one hand and being brutally honest about why we're here on the other. I think I'll try to find some balance between the two. Undoubtedly, I'm always glad to be here, joined in mission with our courageous women warriors and civic leaders, Summer, Frandel, and Jen. And while the foundation sits in this circle tonight in fulfillment of our fundamental role of community convening and advocacy and civic engagement, I have to say I come here tonight a little frustrated. My frustration stems from the fact that when it comes to critical, urgent issues of public safety and public communication about public safety, I fundamentally believe that is not the role of the civic sector, but rather the role of the public sector. And I'll stop there and say thank you to Director Joshin and Austin for Director Austin from DPNR and Vitima for carving out time in your schedule to once again be present. DPNR and Vitima have always said yes to our requests to attend and participate actively in our convening. So thank you so much for saying yes to the invitation. I want to also take a moment to establish some facts and considerations for the record. First and foremost, St. Croix Foundation and our community partners are all small, unendowed nonprofits, which may not mean anything to most of the people on this call, but it means a great deal to me because it means that none of us are wealthy community-based organizations. We are all tiny, overworked nonprofits trying to lead deep and wide systems change in a difficult environment, all with very few operating resources. The kind of community engagement work that we do on controversial issues like the refinery is especially challenging given the hyper-political and politically punitive environment that we exist in here in the Virgin Islands. It is not only risky business, it's work that demands extraordinary courage and sacrifice. All of us place a lot on the line to honor our social contract and our commitment to the voiceless and vulnerable in our community, which is why I really want to recognize the three civic leaders I stand beside and oftentimes behind of, and for whom I hold such incredible admiration. Frandel, Summer, Jen, your courage in the face of risk gives me life. Your uncompromising commitment to justice, to the preservation of our precious land resources, and most of all, to our people is a demonstration of real civic leadership. And I don't want that to get lost in this moment today. So thank you so much for all you do. I want to also take time to acknowledge and thank our national champions and federal partners who have been the most steady allies and with whom we continue to nurture very honest, sometimes tense, but always respectful relationships. Lisa Garcia, Dave Klusner, Walter Mugden, thank you for being so committed to strengthening our ties, even when we hold your feet to the fire to uphold your regulatory mandates. We sincerely appreciate your demonstrated commitment to listening to us and to maintaining open lines of communication. And I want to also offer a special acknowledgement to EPA Administrator Michael Regan. Even though he's not been to St. Croix yet, we are grateful to him for listening and for his leadership. Now, getting down to the meat of tonight's convening, I want to set the record straight for those who may not know and who may be curious about why we are the ones leading this conversation. In fact, our conversation and our advocacy and our convening on the issue of environmental justice started a very long time ago. For St. Croix Foundation, it actually began immediately following the closure of Hovenza in 2012, when we launched a series of 8 community roundtables with residents, business owners, and key government officials. From those roundtables, we generated a list of recommendations and insight garnered from community stakeholders, all pointing in the direction of more progressive, more sustainable, and environmentally just economic development strategies for St. Croix. All fell on deaf ears. Our very strong advocacy continued in 2018, as all of us in the environmental sector petitioned the legislature directly and almost singularly in advance of the ratification of the ARC-like agreement. 1 year later, in 2019, the foundation hosted a 2-day environmental forum in advance of the restart of the refinery to explore the history of heavy industry on St. Croix. During that time, we convened civic and public sector leaders, along with local and national historians, including Bennington professor David Bond, to lead a conversation around the long story of St. Croix's industrial past, present, and future. Then again, in 2019, we hosted our first environmental town hall 6 months after the forum in response to one of the earliest incidents at the refinery involving the release of hundreds of massive foam buoys that broke free during the installation of the underwater pipeline that was permitted in our waters. Those buoys littered several South Shore beaches with thousands of shards of disintegrating foam 2 whole years before the official restart. And then finally, last summer, we hosted a series of 3 town halls from May to June of 2021 in response to the series of oil releases after the restart. I outlined all of this to say to EPA, CDC, OSHA, all of our federal partners, all of our local policymakers, that I don't want to speak for our partners, but I'm tired. And I think our community is tired. Some in our community are actually sick and tired. And we look forward to hearing from you tonight and to hopefully once and for all garnering your commitment to ensuring the safety of our community. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to hand the mic over to Jen to continue remarks. Thank you once again for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, Deanna. My name is Jen Valulis. I am the director of the St. Croix Environmental Association. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. In particular, I would like to, I'd like to welcome all of our panelists, our special invited guests, and in particular, the St. Croix community members to this town hall and discussion. I only have a short time to speak to you tonight because the focus of this town hall is indeed our invited guests and this community discussion. But I do want to further set the stage of some of the issues that will be discussed by recapping what has happened with the refinery facility in just the last 2 years. There's obviously a much longer history with this facility ranging over many decades, and that has involved massive environmental contamination, much of which eventually led to its closure in 2012, where it sat idle and unmaintained for nearly a decade. I do recommend, if you want to learn more about that part of the refinery's history, I suggest reading the excellent articles written by Dr. David Bond and published in the St. Croix Source. And I think that we can provide the links in the chat to that at some point this evening. So to go back to February of 2020, residents west of the refinery woke up to suffocating fumes usually in the middle of the night. People reported fainting, uncontrollable coughing, headaches, nausea. And this is how we came to find out that the St. Croix refinery had started its refining operations again. There was no public announcement, only toxic gas clouds. The St. Croix community had had a preview of what was to come. Deanna mentioned some of this in the months leading up to this reopening. We saw hydrocarbon releases, large flares, a fire on the site, polystyrene debris littered over the South Shore, and a lack of control of oil-contaminated stormwater after heavy rainfall. It sounds really dramatic to speak of it now, but people downwind from the refinery were suffering for months from fumes and flares once it started opening or refining. And there was little response or oversight from regulatory officials. There were hotlines set up by Limetree and by DPNR, but there was little result of the many people we know that called those hotlines. We learned that the air monitors were not operating beyond the facility fence line. And we were told things like the pollution was from a manhole, or that it was from seaweed, or that it was just a few highly sensitive people that were complaining. EPA did set up a hotline, calls to this hotline, and later a community health and environmental survey revealed that it was actually thousands of people that were affected by the fumes, in addition to oil in cisterns and on roofs and in gardens. As Deanna mentioned, the nonprofit organizations in the environmental sector appealed to the EPA to step in and help. And after 4 months, capped off by a massive explosion that rained oil on the west end of St. Croix so dramatically that it received international attention, the EPA stepped in to halt operations of the facility until the long list of issues could be resolved. And about 2 months later, Limetree declared bankruptcy, and eventually the facility was sold. As a refinery is once again sat idle during bankruptcy hearings and the sale, we are learning more about the state of the facility through some fairly shocking inspection reports from both the EPA and OSHA, including that even while idle, the facility can pose a very real danger to our community. We are very grateful to those agencies for providing those reports and for their willingness to speak tonight with the St. Croix community about the results and clarify questions that we have. The EPA has also recently announced the crucial decision to require a PSD permit, which is a prevention of significant deterioration for this facility to operate again. Given that Port Hamilton, the current owners, have stated their intention to start refining oil again in 2023, this is an important development, and Director Garcia and her team will tell us more about that today. This permit is something that the St. Croix community itself had lobbied for in November 2019, before the disastrous restart of the facility in 2020, with a petition that received over 900 signatures in less than a week. So it's absolutely something that the community has stated its desire for. To close, I'm really looking forward to our discussion tonight, to hearing from both the experts and from our community. And I encourage all of those listening to not let their involvement end with this town hall. Please continue to ask questions, to learn more about the issues we discussed, and overall demand that the St. Croix community be kept safe. Thank you. And I believe we're on to Frandell next.
Next, we'll be hearing from EPA Regional Administrator for the second region, Region 2, Lisa Garcia.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Deanna, Jen, and of course, Frandell, and to the whole community, St. Croix community, for inviting us, these town halls. As was discussed throughout in the chronology or the history of all these town halls are super important to make sure that this communication between the community and some of the agencies and others working on these issues continue to stay in touch. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Garcia, Regional Administrator for EPA's Region 2, which includes the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, also New York and New Jersey, and 8 federally recognized Indian nations. I'm joined here by many of my colleagues from EPA who are working hard with me on this. And so you'll see on the screens, Walter Mugden, who's the Deputy Regional Administrator, Olivia Glenn, who's the Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor for Equity, many colleagues from Regional Counsel's Office, from the Superfund Division, and others, as well as David Klusner, who is the Director of Strategic Programs, and I'm sure many recognize him. He's been involved in this for many years. So I'm also pleased that we're joined tonight by Regional Administrator Rich Mendelson from OSHA. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, as we all talk about, the Biden administration has this kind of whole of government approach. And so it's really great that we're able to talk about some of the issues together with the community. And I'd just like to acknowledge some of the other panelists from who will be talking later. So I'll get straight into some of the recent facts, I guess, that you know, the community wants to hear, so we can get to more of the community engagement and dialogue. As many of you are aware, EPA recently took some important steps to protect the communities in St. Croix, and Jen walked through a little bit of the history of this. So just as a reminder, while there seems to be a lot of decisions of late coming out of EPA, as a reminder, EPA is not the only regulator involved. And so while the recent decisions are just kind of the latest developments or the latest determinations, as you heard from Jen, there's a long history working with the facility, and there are a number of regulators who you'll hear from some after I speak. So everyone has a role to play in ensuring the protection of the community and obviously ensuring the public health of the community. So using our regulatory authorities, EPA has been working in concert with many of the partners, especially the government of the USVI, to really oversee the environmental aspects of this facility. We continue to work with, at first with Hovenza, then when Lime Tree Bay took over the refinery in 2018, we worked to make sure that they were complying with the environmental laws, and we continue to do that to the present day with the new owners. So while the owners of the facility have changed over the years, EPA's commitment to the residents remains as strong as ever. And I was glad to hear that EPA is at least responding. It sounds like Jen and Deanna were saying, responding a little bit more quickly and getting out there. And that's really our role, is to make sure that the facility complies with the federal environmental regulations, as we would do with any facility. So here's the latest update that we have not since our last community call. Last week on December 5th, EPA signed an agreement along with the new owners that require Port Hamilton Refinery and Transportation to hire experts to safely remove chemicals that are not being properly managed at the facility, in the equipment or on the site. And these are some of the chemicals that were identified in that September investigation and out of the report that we issued in October. So obviously these are of real concern, and we've asked the facility to safely remove all those chemicals. EPA will be on site during any work to further ensure that this is done properly and obviously safely. That's the main concern. Specifically, this agreement will ensure the removal of ammonia, liquefied petroleum gas, and other chemicals. Amines is one, and I will have someone maybe talk about the details of what that is. But under the terms of the agreement, Port Hamilton will remove all of the ammonia, all of the liquid petroleum gas, the amines, hydrogen sulfide from the equipment at the facility. These chemicals have been used in the past for refining processes, but as we know, They're not operating right now, and they do pose a threat, or they can be dangerous. The agreement also requires them to take immediate actions. And so this was on December 5th, so things are already moving and in process or progress. One is including increased monitoring and inspections of the systems containing the amine, ammonia, and liquefied petroleum gas, which I'll just say LPG from here on out for that, and other actions to improve the ability to respond to any potential emergency, which we do not want, but at least to make sure that that's there and ready to go in case there is an emergency. The agreement requires the work to be performed by a qualified contractor to assess the systems containing the ammonia, LPG, amine, and hydrogen sulfide, and then determine how to safely remove those chemicals. The new owners, the company since then has submitted the names and qualifications of the contractors. Advizian is one, US DBUS, ZECO with a Z, and Coral Management Group. And so we received the names of those contractors on December 9th. EPA then approved the qualifications of those contractors on December 14th, so yesterday. And the contractors then have 30 days to perform this assessment of the 3 different systems and propose the options of how we get to safe removal of all those chemicals. The contractors will provide options in a report to EPA. EPA will review it and comment within 7 days. And then the work to remove the materials will start within 5 days of EPA's approval. So once again, it's like within 30 days, hopefully sooner than that, and then removal starts 5 days after approval. We do obviously want to get this right, so the planning for the work will take some time. EP estimates that the work to remove the chemicals will start in early to mid-February. The order also requires reports to be submitted during and upon completion of the work. Again, EPA will be on site to oversee all this work that is mandated by the order. And we wanted to mention something else about this, is that importantly, we will also monitor the air during the work. Although the air monitoring plan is still being drafted at the time, we anticipate monitoring during the operations at the facility, at the fence line around the facility, and in the nearby community for compounds specific to the operations, especially ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. Obviously, we'll be continue to consult with all of you, community leaders, to inform, to get some input on the monitoring, and we'll make sure that there's an understanding of the monitoring practices used and some of the emergency response systems that are in place. I think we've mentioned this before, but EPA is obviously holding this facility to the same standards that we would hold any refinery or industrial facility. This means that the facility must not pose a serious risk to workers or community members. And they really have to, they must, not really, they must comply with our federal environmental laws. So I'm sure that folks have a lot of questions around that. And we, like I said, we have our full team here ready and willing to do our best to answer some of the questions. I know there'll be a lot around that. I do want to just reiterate, I think what Jen had mentioned, that we did on November 17th, we announced our determination to require the facility to get a new Clean Air Act permit, the PSD permit, before commencing operations. And so that decision remains in place, but we're happy to discuss the actions and other continuing work to protect the community, to protect all of you near the refinery, and ensure any operations of the facility, once again, are within the mandates of environmental laws and now this new order. So thank you again for having us at this town hall. We're really happy to be in touch and in communication on these serious issues. And I will hand it back to Frandel. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much. I am pleased to moderate the conversation this evening and hope that we will be able to answer a lot of questions and deal with a lot of the issues that have been expressed by the community. As we deal with the technical issues surrounding the remediation and removal of the dangerous chemicals that still sit on the site, and look retrospectively to how we're dealing with the ongoing health and environmental impacts of the incidences that did occur. It's important to frame this not only in terms of the lack of corporate responsibility, the need for government intervention, but the real human impact of what has occurred over the last 2 years, but more importantly, 50 years for the people of St. Croix. Someone said to me today that they were going to jump on the call because their home was impacted. Their cistern was assessed, their roof was assessed, it was determined there was contamination. And fortunately, they had the wherewithal to pay for the remediation, to have their roof cleaned, to have their cistern cleaned and resealed. And they're wondering if and when they're going to be compensated. There are people who are still trying to understand what the health impacts are of having inhaled the various chemicals that were released by the refinery accidents. And what are the potential short-term and long-term medical issues that we have to deal with? So there are people who live with this every day. And as I had stated in a previous meeting with R.A. Garcia and the EPA team, reading the report is disturbing, frightening, and every time there's a loud boom, we jump because we're not sure where it's coming from. So hopefully this evening we can frame what that potential catastrophic threat is. We can get some input on what our local government is doing to remediate and respond, what sort of public information systems exist and can be activated so that our community is aware every step of the way of what's happening, and especially during the remediation process, because I'm no scientist, but I bet you once you touch that stuff, some of it gets more volatile than just leaving it alone. So we really do appreciate all of the federal and local governmental entities that have pulled together to respond and have shown up tonight. We particularly appreciate the over 90 people that have joined the call on the Zoom, and I'm sure there are a lot more on the Facebook Live. We are asking everyone to please put your questions in the chat. The Facebook chats are being monitored. The chat here is being monitored so that questions can be asked. We anticipate that it might be a little difficult to just unmute a caller, but we'll figure out whether that can work or not. And we might try it once, and if it doesn't work, then we're going back to just the chat, folks. So thank you again, and I'm going to now move on. Jessica, is who's next on the agenda? Is it?
So we have Richard Mendelson with OSHA.
Great, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Great. Okay, good evening. It's great to be here. My name is Richard Mendelson. I'm the regional administrator for OSHA, and I also have some staff with me here tonight. My deputy, Steve Kaplan, is in the room, and our area director, Alfredo Nogueras, who is resident in Puerto Rico, is present. We also have some members of our inspection team, and we also have a compliance officer who is resident in the VI, and is a new position that we've added just within the past year, and it's the first time that OSHA actually has a compliance officer resident and assigned in the VI. The VI is covered under our Puerto Rico area office. So I'll give you some background and some comments here. So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is an agency within the Labor Department, and our jurisdiction covers worker safety and health. OSHA Region 2 covers New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, which is the same jurisdiction as our partners at EPA. And as I mentioned, our Puerto Rico area office covers the Caribbean. We regularly coordinate with our federal, state, and local regulatory partners on issues that impact both workers, but also the public, the environment, transportation, etc. And in the Virgin Islands, federal OSHA regulates the private sector and federal employers. So we do cover this facility, but we should note that we also have the USDI government via the Virgin Islands Department of Labor Division of Occupational Safety and Health, or VIDOSH, which covers employees of the territory and local government through an annual grant from OSHA. But in this case, federal OSHA is the regulator for this facility. OSHA regulates refineries and certain chemical plants primarily through our Process Safety Management, or PSM standard, although a variety of other general industry safety and health standards may also apply for specific hazards or operations. In all of these, OSHA addresses occupational safety and health hazards that workers are exposed to within the facility, so generally within the fence line. And process safety inspections are led and conducted by highly skilled, specially trained, and experienced OSHA compliance officers. In the case of Port Hamilton Refining and Transportation, OSHA received information in late October about potential worker safety and health hazards concerning the refinery, followed by a referral from EPA. By way of background, last year, OSHA had inspection activity at the same facility, operating then as the Lime Tree Bay Refining. In June of 2021, OSHA conducted an on-site process safety inspection by a team of inspectors. In July of 2021, OSHA sent the employer a letter recommending safety and health precautions regarding extended shutdown. In November of 2021, OSHA issued 20 violations with a $259,407 proposed penalty. The employer contested the citations, but also declared bankruptcy and stopped operating the facility. In April of 2022, the employer settled the citations with OSHA, affirming all of the violations as issued. The penalty remains before bankruptcy court. In earlier November of 22, so last month, OSHA evaluated the new information received about the facility and subsequently deployed an inspection team to St. Croix on Sunday, November 13th, and opened an inspection of the facility on Monday, the 14th. This team consisted of 5 OSHA staff and spent the entire week at the facility. The team primarily focused on 2 processes, and you heard these referred to by EPA as well. We looked at the ammonia and the liquefied petroleum gas. At the time of the inspection, there were no actual refining operations in process, and the covered chemicals were in storage only. For refinery inspections, OSHA will typically select 1 or 2 processes to assess compliance. An OSHA inspection starts with an opening conference, followed by a physical walk around, review of documents, and interviews of employers, employees, managers, and any unions. Some of these may be conducted and are being conducted off-site after the initial visit. OSHA analyzes all this information to determine compliance with various standards and other obligations under the OSHA Act, such as our General Duty Clause. If violations are documented, OSHA has a 6-month statute of limitations to issue citations to an employer. The burden of proof is on OSHA to document violations. OSHA will classify any violations and determine the proposed penalty based on factors such as the severity and probability of the potential incident, as well as the size, history, and good faith of the employer. The employer then has 15 working days after receipt of an OSHA citation to either settle with the area office or to contest, meaning appeal, the citations to the Independent Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission, which oversees trials conducted by administrative law judges. And although their name is similar to us, the Review Commission is not part of OSHA or the Labor Department. last week, a week ago today, on December 8th, OSHA's Puerto Rico area office sent Port Hamilton a letter highlighting certain concerns regarding emergency response plans at the facility. So it's important to note that that letter is not a citation. In the interest of worker safety and health, OSHA wanted to raise these initial concerns to the attention of the facility, while at the same time we are still conducting and continuing our inspection and evaluating all the facts to determine a future course of action. At a future point in time, OSHA will determine what, if any, citations to issue for conditions at the facility. We don't speculate on future enforcement actions. We're going to follow a fact-based approach for the evidence necessary to support a citation. I was also told just in the chat earlier that just this afternoon we received a response from the employer. We had requested a 1-week response, and that has not been evaluated yet, but that's kind of breaking news. So I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to attend this session. All the community groups, we're going to stay around. I want to present a brief summary of our OSHA activities and explain a little bit of the OSHA regulatory framework. And of course, we'll be around to answer any questions and continue to work through this with sensitivity and for the workers concerned, and as well understanding the place of the refinery in the community. Thank you very much.
So Frandel, I'll go ahead and allow all of the panelists to unmute themselves, and I will put everybody, like I'll pin the whole panel, and then you can go ahead and get started with introductions and the panel discussion.
Thank you. So you're gonna unmute Lisa and Walter. And I would suggest that we also unmute, I'm getting there, our representatives from DPNR. And I think I saw Dean on here from Department of Labor.
Yeah, Walter Mugden, Frandel.
Walter.
Yeah.
Hey, now this is Director Joshua from Vitima. Director Andrews on just from a listening perspective, so I would respect that any questions you can direct to me. We'll address those. And Director Callwood also is available for questions, but was not going to be on the panelist discussion.
Okay.
But he is going to be available. Commissioner Oriol was not available tonight. And I don't believe Commissioner Encarnacion from the Department of Health is on either, but I'll be the government representative for most of the questions, ma'am.
Appreciate that, Director Joshin. So I'll kick this off with a question that's popped up already on the Facebook Live as well as here, is the timeline. And I believe, Walter, you indicated that you could address that. You know, what's the time frame for removing the chemicals from the site once the process begins early to mid-February?
Yes, thank you, Frandel, and thanks to all of you. So under the administrative order that Lisa spoke about, the order that we issued on the 5th of December, there's pretty detailed timelines for all the actions that have to be taken. And as Lisa explained, the first steps were that the company was supposed to identify expert contractors who would identify and determine how or recommend how to remove these chemicals. And that step has been taken. The company gave us suggested contractors last Friday, and yesterday we approved the contractors. That approval that we gave yesterday on the 14th of December triggers a 30-day period. So that's up through January 13th, during which the contractors, and there are several of them, have to come back with have to determine what options there are for safely removing these 3 major groups of chemicals. And I'll just reiterate that there's about 40,000 pounds of ammonia in a storage vessel. There's about 37,000 pounds of liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG. And then there's also the amine unit has a certain amount of amine and almost certainly hydrogen sulfide in it. So those are the 3 different groups of chemicals that we are most concerned about. OSHA has identified those same 3 groups of chemicals as being of considerable concern. So starting yesterday is the 30-day time period during which the contractors are supposed to determine what are the options for safely removing these chemicals. Then at the end of that 30 day, or however long that takes, it could take less than 30 days, but it can't take more than 30 days. Then they have 7 days thereafter to write a report and get that report in our hands that lists all of the specific options along with the timetables associated with each. We will look at that report very carefully, and then there'll be once we say, okay, these are the options that we are approving for each of the chemicals, then within 5 days, the work of doing that removal has to start. So what you see is that there are very specific timelines, but some of these are contingent time dates. So that if the 30 days expires on January 13th, at that time, the contractors have to complete their work. But if they do it earlier, then the entire timeline moves up a little bit. Once a report comes to us, it's uncertain exactly how long it'll take us to review it. It could be a day, it could be several days. And so that would be another contingency, because once we say, okay, now our review is completed, and this is the option that we're approving, or the group of options that we're approving, that then triggers the timeline to get started in the field with the actual work. If you put all those timelines together and make some reasonable estimates, we can assume that around the very end of January or early February is when the actual field work will begin to actually do the removal of these chemicals. And as Lisa emphasized, we will be there whenever any work is going on. We will be there overseeing that work. We will certainly reach out to our colleagues and our partners in the Virgin Islands government, and expect that they would be also participating in the oversight or being aware of all the work that's going on, and making sure that that is being well handled. So that's an overview of the timeline. The one other thing I'll mention, and this is specifically stated in the order, during the 30 days between yesterday and the 13th of February, 13th of January, during that time, we can and will be speaking with the contractors and with the refinery owners about the options that they are developing. So we want to be familiar with those options as they're being developed, so that when the options report comes to us, it isn't the first time we're seeing these things, that we already have an understanding of where they're headed. And we can give them guidance along the way. If they are working towards an option that we think is not likely to be successful, we can give them some feedback ahead of time as well, so they don't spin their wheels unnecessarily. So we're going to be meeting with them during this 30-day period, as well as then reviewing the options report when it's ultimately submitted.
Great, thank you for that. And do you have any idea, once the work begins, how long it will take before the chemicals are removed from the site? And I'm assuming they will be shipped off island, or has that not been determined?
That will be that. Let me answer the second part of that first. So nothing has been determined yet. That'll all be part of the options. It is almost certain that among the options that they will be displaying to us will be off island, shipping it off island, either for resale or for disposal. Some of these materials have value, and if they can safely ship them off island to sell them elsewhere, that's a plausible alternative that they can put forward. We're not automatically saying no, that can't be done. In terms of how long it will actually take to do the removal, again, that's the options report that they have to give us has to include a timeline for the various approaches. And the timeline may be different for these 3 different groups of chemicals. Bottom line is, sitting here today, we can't say it's going to be a week or a month. What's most important is that it be done thoughtfully and carefully, but but once the actual removal starts, I would hypothesize that the process will proceed relatively rapidly because nobody wants this to be stretched out. The goal is that when you actually start moving these chemicals, you want to do it carefully, but you also want to get it done so that it doesn't drag on and on.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Aisha Duval. Good evening and thank you for holding this town hall. Lime Tree has ceased water distribution to affected residents as of October 8th. No reason was given, but I can assume the bankruptcy proceedings had something to do with it. Are there any plans for Port Hamilton to continue the water distribution or any requirements for adding for Port Hamilton to provide potable water to the affected households?
So this may be a question I don't know if anybody from Port Hamilton is on the call, but I suspect not, but perhaps the Virgin Islands government has some insight into this.
Director Joshin, is that something that you could address? Jessica, he may have to be unmuted.
All right, thank you for the question. This is the first I'm hearing it as a territory. The government, we can take that back and find out, but that was something that we were aware of, that had ceased, but thank you for sharing that information.
Okay, great, thank you. And would you be kind enough to report it back so that it can be disseminated or even a public statement? That would be great. Lawrence, sewer is after you.
If I could just add one thing, so people are perhaps aware of this, that there is a dispute between the Ocean Point Terminal, which is what that portion of the larger facility is now called, and that portion of the facility continues to be owned by a Lime Tree Bay company. They use the name Ocean Point, but the company that owns it is a Lime Tree Bay company. The refinery, of course, is now owned by Port Hamilton Refining and Transportation, with whatever association with the West Indies Petroleum Limited they have. There is a dispute, an ongoing dispute, and even a lawsuit, I believe, between the two entities regarding the utilities. And when we say utilities, we mean drinking water, wastewater, and electricity. Those three types of utilities were historically provided on the facility when Hovenza owned it and Hess Oil, to both the refinery and the terminal, and to a number of homes in the residential area, I think maybe around 200 homes. So if in fact there was a cessation of delivery of drinking water, as this person, the person who posed the question suggests, it may have something to do with that ongoing dispute between the two entities.
Thank you. And you've touched on something, the separation that was done for bankruptcy purposes, and the separation of ownership. Is that something that is being reviewed by the federal government at this point?
So the Department of Justice, with which EPA works very closely on a number of the matters having to do with the old Lime Tree Bay facility, and still going on now through the Lime Tree bankruptcy and then on into the current ownership. The Justice Department has posed questions to the new owners about the ownership of the refinery. And there are these two different companies, Port Hamilton Refining and Transportation, West Indies Petroleum Limited. It was originally our understanding that both these entities together were owners of the refinery, not of the terminal, but the refinery. West Indies Petroleum has subsequently said in public, no, we're not the owner, we're simply an investor. It's Port Hamilton that is the owner. The Department of Justice has asked them to document and explain that, and it's my understanding that we have not yet gotten an answer to that series of questions.
Appreciate that. We have another question from Lawrence Sewer. Do we have records of past environmental impact statements on the site? And do you have present impact statements and results? Did the VI Natural Resources Management conduct those impact studies? And are they publicly available?
So I can start and speak on behalf of EPA, but the Virgin Islands government may want to address the question from their perspective. So environmental impact statements or environmental impact assessments are something that are required in the federal government under certain circumstances. And those circumstances have actually not been triggered with respect to the refinery. So no, there has not been a federal environmental impact statement. However, if EPA is in the role of issuing, for example, a significant environmental permit, such as a prevention of significant deterioration permit that Lisa spoke about, and Jen Valulis also mentioned it in her opening remarks, there are elements to the permit process that are similar to or analogous to what would happen if there were environmental impact statements, specifically that there has to be a very detailed assessment of what air emissions the facility is expected to produce once operating, how those relate to what are called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are the minimum health-related thresholds for a whole bunch of pollutants. And under this PSD program, the facility also has to employ the best available air pollution control technology. We would analyze that, EPA would analyze that application in great detail. If we conclude that a permit is appropriate, then we would publish a proposed permit, and that would be subject to public scrutiny and public comment. So there is a similar set of procedures that would happen if there were to be an environmental impact statement written, where you would put it out as a draft and you would invite public comment and then respond to those comments. So that's an important element, is that the PSD process includes a public review process in it.
Thank you. Questions are coming in hard and fast. One of the questions is, should the community downwind and fence line communities anticipate, or is there a risk of potential health impacts during the removal of the chemicals and equipment? And beyond that, perhaps just sharing with us what the potential hazard is as we speak, even prior to the removal.
So as we speak, there is the risk that we identified in the inspection report that was previously described, and which is also reiterated in the administrative order as sort of findings of fact that give us the authority to issue that order. Those risks are potential or prospective. What we say is there are these dangerous chemicals that are stored in this facility. They have been there since the time that it was operational, almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. As long as the chemicals stay contained in the vessel, the tanks where they are, there is no risk. The risk is, should there be some failure of a pressure valve or a relief valve or something else. And these chemicals are dangerous. Take ammonia as an example, anhydrous ammonia. It is heavier than air. So if there were to be a release, it doesn't go up into the air and rise and become diluted very quickly. Rather, it stays at ground level and would move with the wind in whatever direction the wind would blow it. So it is that poses certainly concerns or risks to the workers, should that happen. And depending on which way the wind is blowing, it could pose risks to the surrounding community. Those are the risks that we talked about in our inspection report. And OSHA has identified similar concerns. What we have done in the meantime is we have identified interim measures that the refinery owners must take to absolutely minimize the risks. And they have to do regular inspections. They have to have a adequate crew around the clock to inspect and to make sure that they're looking at the thing every day. So our number one goal and our number one priority is to avoid that these risks I just described ever actually happen. And we will do everything we can to make sure that they do not occur.
Walter, Frandell, I just lost you on my screen, but can I just add something here? Sorry.
Yes, and Administrator Garcia, so we have been informed that there is a pretty extensive power outage on St. Croix right now.
I was
And
just
so
gonna
we
say,
lost some of our Prussian colleagues. So we're still recording, and we're still going to make this recording available, and folks are rejoining as they can on their cell phones and whatnot. So let's carry on, and until our fearless moderator returns, I can try to keep
okay.
the questions coming.
I was just gonna say, we lost like 25 people. Okay, so, well, I hope everyone's okay. And I'm glad we're recording this. So along the lines of making sure that we communicate, obviously, if folks can't rejoin, we're certainly available to continue to answer questions. But what I did want to say is there was a request or a suggestion, and some of the questions that are coming in are related to this. Like, how will the community know when this is happening? How will the community be informed of what's going on? And so I don't have a plan in place, but I love that idea, and I will take that back, and we will figure out a way that we can continue to communicate regularly when there's an update to give, and if we're going to be on site, or when an inspection is happening, or what's to have those markers in place, and then be able to communicate to the public. Obviously, we have a website that we can update, but maybe we can figure something else out that, if we communicate with a few people, and then they can make sure to amplify that and send that out to some listserv or something like that. So we'll work with folks to figure out that communication plan with folks. Anyway, so I just wanted to add that I think that'll be really important. And what I will do is, I'll just ask Rich if there's a way that we can also, work with you to provide any updates on the OSHA side. So, yeah. Oh, Rich can't. He's muted, but I think he gave us the thumbs up. So we'll make sure that we work with OSHA to, oh, there you go.
Okay, yes, I think something about the power outage has disrupted our sound here, but Jane, we haven't been able to hear from you yet, and I think you have such an interesting perspective as someone who has responded to chemical disasters in your role. And so would you mind introducing yourself and talking a little bit about your history and what some of the work you have done recently and how that intersects with what we're seeing here on St. Croix?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Jane Williams. I chair the Sierra Club's National Clean Air Team, and I'm the Executive Director of California Communities Against Toxics. And so I've done work in this field now for 3 decades, and I've responded to a number of chemical disasters, both in California and across the United States, and helped local communities understand, what's happening during a chemical disaster and what happens in the aftermath. So I was given 4 questions by the community to respond to, and I'd just like to walk through those really fast. But first of all, I want to say I work across the country with lots of communities that are at the base, living on the front lines of the petrochemical infrastructure. And so I get to see a lot of very disturbing things in my job. I'd have to say that the inspection report that I reviewed on the St. Croix refinery is definitely like in the top 3 things that, you know, my son who lives with me was joking that maybe I should send, maybe instead of me presenting here today, that I should be sending Father John, who's from Resurrection Church. He's a very famous environmental justice activist here in California, and he's a Catholic priest. So it is a little disturbing to me to hear that these chemicals actually are not going to be removed till you know, mid-February, which means you've got like another 60 days of living next to a facility that can only be termed to be very sporting. So here's some things that the local community should understand. And liquefied petroleum gas is dangerous. Yes, it explodes, and it will, you know, if it explodes, it will catch on fire and it will burn. And that would be bad. But what I'm really concerned about is the anhydrous ammonia, because what happens when you have a major release of anhydrous ammonia is that it hugs the ground and it basically displaces oxygen. And the real problem is that I still do not have the risk management prevention plan. So I cannot tell you what the hazard zone is, but normally these are hazard zone 3 chemicals, which means that for about 500-pound release, it'll go a quarter of a mile. And here you're talking about 80 times that. So in preparation for this event today, I consulted with a couple of process hazard experts, and they're like, you know, anybody who's living within like a mile to 2 miles of a refinery could easily be overcome with these fumes. Their eyes would be, the anhydrous ammonia, it blinds you, it attacks your eyes. And a couple of breaths at high concentrations, like there's nothing you're gonna be able to do for people. And one of the serious challenges here in the Virgin Islands is the fact that the hospital was only 1.25 miles from the facility. So your hospital is actually in the hazard zone. Anhydrous ammonia at this level, if you had a catastrophic release, would quickly overwhelm the ability of the workers to fire the water cannons. Plus, because I don't have the RMP in front of me, I have no confidence that those workers would even know what to do with a major anhydrous ammonia release. They would have to have their scuba gear on them, and they would have to have eye protection on them directly. And these fumes, these gases will be pushed on shore because of the unique positioning of where the refinery is. So it's not that the anhydrous ammonia would just be released and sort of hang out at the refinery. No, it's going to be pushed from offshore winds directly into the path of your population and your hospital. So I hate to be the deliverer of bad news, but this is really a horrific catastrophic release scenario in which you would have a mass casualty event, and there would be very little you could do about it. And so when faced with something like this, really the only logical thing to do is to make damn sure you do not have a release under any circumstances, because there is no way to manage it. Your local government does not have the ability to respond fast enough. Even though you have a fire brigade nearby at the terminal, you don't have any tabletop exercises occurring. So you don't have any way for the folks that are most trained, that are at the terminal, to actually intercede and help. And so I don't know what EPA's plan is. I don't know what OSHA's plan is here to train these workers. I understand you're doing regular inspections, which is all great, but really those workers should be wearing their scuba gear, and they should be wearing eye protection at all times, because the only way to stop the anhydrous ammonia from like overwhelming the entire island is with the water cannons. And this is the only inspection report I have ever read in my 3-year career where the inspectors made sure that the workers knew how to use the water cannons before they left. That really got my attention, I gotta say. But the chance of a worker being able to make it to the water cannon, if there's a catastrophic release, is just about nil. I'm gonna tell you, I'm just gonna be blunt with you. So given that that's the situation on the ground, everything needs to be done to prevent a major release of anhydrous ammonia. Everything needs to be done to get this anhydrous ammonia and these other chemicals off the island as soon as possible. And it's rather shocking to me that actually this much anhydrous ammonia was stored at that facility with such a dearth of local infrastructure to really handle it and manage it. It makes me actually look back at how poorly the refinery was run while it was operating, and really think about that we really avoided a catastrophe then. I mean, they did blow up the coking unit, right? From just raw, not misunderstanding of how to run a refinery. And so I guess trying to make lemonade out of lemons here, we should say that, you know, there's already a high potential, right, for catastrophic release because the refinery was run so poorly, and that didn't occur. So with that, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think that speed is on our side here. We need to be removing the chemicals as rapidly as possible. My recommendation would be, if there's any way to train these workers as quickly as possible to keep their scuba gear and their eye protection with them at all times. And, you know, you can try to alert people if there's an anhydrous ammonia release, but quite frankly, because of the onshore breezes, the offshore breezes, there's no way you're going to be able to outrun it. I don't even know if there's an alert system at the refinery because, again, I don't have the risk management prevention plan. So it's a very dangerous situation. One of the most dangerous situations I have ever seen. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, so we are certainly getting questions from the audience. Let me go to the next one. So the EPA identified 3 main types of chemicals or groups of chemicals. Are there more?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Those are the ones that pose the specific risk. Those are the ones that are stored in larger quantities. There are other maintenance problems that we've identified. As Jane indicated, there's a lack of preparedness plans and risk management plans on the facility, at the facility. But it's these 3 groups of chemicals that are the ones that create a specific risk.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, let's see. How will the removal of chemicals and equipment affect pending lawsuits directed at Hess and its subsidiaries, like honks that have already filed bankruptcy? Couldn't that amount to removal of evidence that may be relevant to any necessary investigation? I mean, this is a legal question. I'm not sure if anyone on the panel is able to answer. That is a question that came in from the audience.
I'm happy to give a response, which is I think would have no impact whatsoever. We will be documenting everything that gets done. So there'll be no question about what was there and how and in what condition it was being maintained. To the extent that it has relevance to the lawsuits that are underway. I know that there's asbestos lawsuits that were underway, and the honks bankruptcy has probably more to do with the asbestos. The lawsuits over exposure to asbestos than these other things, but whatever is there will be fully documented, and all of that information would be available if it were relevant in some kind of a lawsuit.
Thank you. We got a question about the communities nearby that were affected by the previous emissions from the facility. Will there be specific outreach and information shared with them before the cleanup activities? So perhaps someone from EPA and maybe Director Joshin, if you're able to talk about some of the local, the work that will be done to notify communities.
Yeah. Lisa just spoke about that a few moments ago, and the answer is absolutely yes. We will be as transparent as we can be. We will letting people know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think there was a, oh, sorry. Just to add, there was just a reminder that, you know, the website or the portal that we have online isn't going far enough. And so we'll figure out what that communication, how we make sure that there's communication beyond on the website or online. So we're going to work on that piece to make sure the community is updated and informed along the way.
And this Director Josh, and from Vitima's perspective, working with the federal partners as well as our joint information centers, as well as with Port Hamilton, we want to make sure that information is put out through multiple distribution channels. And again, we have press conferences all the time. Information can be put out. So it's a joint gathering of the information and put out. And we do have the ability for alert systems to go out in times of emergency. But I think what we're talking about, just making sure that information that's shared either the federal side of the house or territory, we can gather up and put that information out to the community, as well as put points of contact. So a combination of Vitima, Joint Information System, DPNR, will definitely make sure that information is shared out to the community in a timely fashion.
And Director Joshin, about the alert system, how would citizens be made aware of, if they want to be on the list for any alerts, or what does that alert system look like, and how can citizens make sure that they're looped in, so to speak?
And the territory-owned controlled system, we call it the Alert VI system, and that's by, you can sign up for that, no cost. We send messages out to your cell phones, your home phones, emails, text messages. We can do it in English, we can do it in Spanish. We can send out TTY messages also if you're hearing impaired. So that's the first way to sign up, and you can do that by visiting the Vitima website, the vitima.vi.gov. And we'll be glad to have you sign up for that. You'll get other updates and notices as you want to do that, typical earthquakes, the impact that may happen, and any tsunami messages that go with that. The other piece is leveraging the federal side of the house, which is the integrated public alert warning system. And that's my most rapid way by which I get information out to anybody that's connected to a cell tower, a person that comes off a cruise ship, a person that comes off of the airplane. They will get that message. If you're outside the territory, you will not get that message, but you will get the Alert VI message. Inside the territory, we can focus it on a geofencing perspective. We can do it by territory. We can do it by a particular area and get very specific on that. The same messaging we would use for an active shooter event also, but you do not have to sign up for that, but you have to basically have a telephone and have it in an on fashion. We don't turn a phone on if it's already been turned off. So those are two mechanisms by which we do that. Of course, working with the police, we have megaphones that can go out and use. The last thing, which is not set up again, we do have our tsunami sirens that can go to be an all hazard system. But if we exercise those, you have to understand what that tone is, different from what a tsunami alert would be. But that's something we can develop as a community, as an early warning system for something that may happen.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we still are having questions coming in. It's exciting that the audience is so engaged in this conversation. Someone asked, if Port Hamilton does not have the financing to remove the chemicals on site, what will happen?
So if they're not able to fulfill their obligations under this administrative order, we EPA have the ability to address the most dangerous of the chemicals, certainly the anhydrous ammonia, the amine, the hydrogen sulfide. The LPG is a slightly different story for complicated legal reasons, but when I say we, I mean EPA's working through the Superfund program can come in with our own contractors, and we can remove the ammonia, we can remove the amine, we can remove the hydrogen sulfide. We have experience doing that. And we have experience doing it in situations where there's a facility with a lot of ammonia, huge amount of ammonia in a very, very bad, being stored in a very bad way, and we were able to manage the removal in a completely safe way. So we do have experience. Doesn't mean there isn't always a risk. There is, but we would do that ourselves then. However, at this stage of the game, we have every expectation that the company will be able to fulfill its obligations.
Thank you. And I see Jane Williams has raised her hand. She might want to weigh in.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand that the anhydrous ammonia tank's under pressure. And that's really very sporting. So I know that after this call, people are going to ask me, why isn't US EPA using its emergency authorities and its own ability to respond at least to remove the anhydrous ammonia? Since now, basically, you're talking about another 2 months, right? So I don't know who from EPA wants to respond to that, and it's okay if you don't have a response, but I can tell you I'm going to get that question.
I can say a couple of things. First of all, the expert companies, the expert consultants and contractors that are being hired, that have been hired, have the expertise. That was the review that we carried out, was to ensure that they had the expertise that was necessary for this. When we do the work ourselves through EPA, we also use contractors. It's not, we don't have any EPA employees going out there and actually doing the work.
No, I understand.
EPA employees are there overseeing the work and making the decisions about how the project should handle, but it's being done by contractors with the expertise, and that's what we expect and insisted that Port Hamilton do as well. They hire the appropriate contractors with our oversight. So that is the normal way in which the Superfund program works. If we were going to be doing the work, again, ourselves, meaning through our own contractors and consultants, we would also have to spend a lot of time down there thinking this through very carefully, that same 30-day period that we've given for the company's consultants to come up with a plan. We would need that time as well to come up with a plan ourselves. So it isn't as if we are, it's not as if we were doing the work ourselves, we could go walk in there tomorrow and start the work. That's simply not how it is. But we agree that doing this as quickly as is prudent, it needs to be done as quickly as we can prudently do it. That is essential.
I would be remiss if I did not remind everybody on this call that the Port Authority in Lebanon complained and asked for the authorities, the federal authorities in Lebanon, for help on the storage of ammonium nitrate in their port for 7 years before it finally exploded, and essentially it has destroyed their country. And if we have a release here, it will be catastrophic. I mean, I think we all know this. And so Lisa, Administrator Garcia, I applaud you for going back and taking a look and thinking, wow, I wonder what else could be there, right? Because this could have just sat there and no one would have known, and you could have had a major release and everyone just would have been surprised. And I am not saying that you guys are not doing the right thing. I am just saying by the time these chemicals are gone, it's going to have been 6 months. So everything you can do to hurry up the process would be good. It is a very dangerous situation. So thank you all. You know, I don't know the folks at OSHA, but I imagine that your hair was standing on end like mine was when you read those reports. These workers are not trained. It is a very dangerous situation. So thank you for all of you for taking this so seriously. I really applaud you.
And I just want to explain for the audience what Jane was just saying. So people know, I think, that back in August, the petroleum coke in the dome, in one of the 2 domes there, basically caught fire because it wasn't being maintained properly. It's supposed to have water dripping on it at all times so that it keeps cool. They didn't do that. A smoldering fire started in early August. The company brought in an expert to deal with getting that fire out. And ultimately, at the end of that period of time, there was a fire outside as well on the conveyor belt that had some leftover petroleum coke that the conveyor belt goes up and drops it into the dome. So there was petroleum coke there too. That caught fire, that was put out. But they used an expert to deal with the smoldering fire. We then sent, at Lisa's request, at Regional Administrator Garcia's request, our inspectors went to the facility to make sure that the coke fire was properly dealt with. And then she said to us, since the problem, the Coke fire, was caused by poor maintenance, what else, exactly as you said, Jane, what else is going wrong? And
Right.
that's when the inspection in September was called for, and we sent our top inspector down there. And he spent 4 days at that inspection that led to that inspection report that you've all seen. So that was her direction, and you're exactly right. It was really important and very prescient.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, obviously, once again, it's, the community keeping us, what was it, holding our feet to the fire, I think Deanna said. But
A metaphorical fire, please.
yeah,
please.
no, well, and then exactly, thank God they put the actual fire out. But I think what I just want to say that we agree with the need to do this and do this as quickly as we can. And so I just want to continue to reiterate that. And here we know who the owners are, and it's their responsibility, right? So as much as folks are saying, what about the federal government? If we had to, we would do this. But right now we know who the owners are, and it's their responsibility to ensure that this site is safe and does not pose a threat to the surrounding community. And that's why we want to work with them. Hopefully, we can expedite some of those timelines. At the same time, we want to make sure that it's done safely. These are chemicals that we're dealing with. And so, and I think I said this last time, it's not like Walter and I can go down there and just, remove the ammonia. This has to be done by sophisticated experts who understand how to do that, so we don't have any real other issues that come up. So while we're trying to ensure that this moves along, we're also ensuring that it's done in the most protective way. And so I appreciate the concern and urgency, and we share that, and that's why we're trying to move this along as quickly as we can, once again, with the safety in mind.
And from the OSHA perspective, if I may, I agree with Jane's concern about the emergency response, and that's why we wrote that interim letter. OSHA's way of communicating with the employer is through citations, when deficiencies are found, of course. It's not unheard of, but we don't typically, put the employer notice in the interim to take steps. But, where there's some exigent circumstances, we feel that there's, a hazard that we want the employer to start on abatement before the whole legal process takes place. That's why we wrote that letter to kind of jumpstart the process, so we don't wait until citations and abatement and everything else. The employer will still have an opportunity, if we approve a citation or if we issue a citation, to address it legally, but the legal obligation exists already. So we were putting them on immediate notice of their need to take certain steps in terms of their emergency responsibility, because as Walter was saying, the hazard is present just from the chemicals being there in a static manner, because the release or a fire could occur, and we wanted them to take steps. It affects workers. We also recognize it affects the community and the environment. So that's where we overlap in our jurisdiction on these issues. So we share the concern. We're not dragging our feet. We want to start that abatement while we're still working towards analyzing, and assessing whether there's a compliance issue.
Thank you so much. So we are getting some really wonderful questions from the audience. We're trying to get to all of them in the order that they're coming in. So just so you know, the more or less we're trying to follow chronological order, although some questions are being asked and answered kind of through the process of the conversation. So the next question that came in is, has the government of VI considered applying for federal assistance with the possibility of hazardous materials if this area is considered a Browns field? And I'm not sure that we've talked about the definition of a Browns field and what that would mean, but that is a question that came in from the community. Is there additional assistance available for the cleaning up of brown fields? I guess maybe that's a way to start attacking that question.
Let me give this an initial crack. So a brownfield is typically a site that has some relatively lower levels of contamination where the contamination on the site is preventing the redevelopment or the beneficial use, the economically or socially beneficial use of a piece of property. Usually it's a site that is not currently being operated. It's an idle site, an old gas station or an old factory site. Brownfield sites are typically at the lower end of the spectrum of contaminated sites. And the federal Superfund program would be at the upper end of the spectrum of dealing with contaminated sites. There are various programs in between and overlapping programs. So right now, this facility, the refinery, is owned by, as Lisa said, we know who the owners are. We don't need to, as long as the owners do that which we direct them to do and do that which is necessary to do to maintain a safe and compliant facility, there is no need to utilize federal government resources to do that work. If, and somebody earlier had asked what would happen if the company went bankrupt or simply disappeared, and the answer is then we do have federal resources that are available that can address various elements, the first and most important of those being the removal of these chemicals. But then beyond that, if there were no owner there who was able or willing to do what needs to be done, then there are various federal programs that might be applicable. But that's speculative, and we don't expect that, and we don't anticipate and expect that to be the case. And we certainly expect these owners to do that which they're responsible to do.
Thank you so much. And actually, thank you so much, Director Joshin. We see that you're back. We know that there's often tech issues in the Virgin Islands, so we completely understand that you had to drop off for a minute. We do have a question that came in that I think is specific to Vaitema. So let me pull that up. What procedures or measures does Vaitema, the fire department, and other local government agencies, as well as Ocean Point, have in place if there is an explosion?
Well, right now it goes back to, what is inside that fence. When we had the Coker incident, the fire did respond to go out there. Director George, Director of Fire, and I had a great conversation. We did meet with Lime Tree Bay in October, and I think the conversation went to our VI fire service is not trained for industrial fires. So that's the first thing. So, we can help advise, we can support, we can do air monitoring. We work with the 23rd CST for capabilities, but going inside that fence is not something that Director George has any of his firefighters trained on doing that. The other piece is we have established the local emergency planning committee. This is something we built up in the last couple of years, and opportunities like this to have the town hall meetings. This is my third one. We've established for about a year now and made it official in October with our handbook, and that's partnering not just with Lime Tree Bay, not just with Port Hamilton, but anybody who has what's called Tier 2 chemicals, the Right to Know Act, if you will, to make sure we look at other places such as Diageo, such as Cruise and Rum, the National Guard, those locations. We have reports that are due in March each year. So besides establishing that relationship, that linkage with them on the local emergency planning committee, those are the information we have back and forth. There's very limited capabilities that we have as a territory to respond to them, besides setting up the Joint Information Center for good information going back and forth. We have Incident Command, we can work back and forth. We do have an emphasis on the environmental side of the house, obviously with DPNR, with BI Fire Service, with the National Guard, with Vaitema, and Department of Health is part of this also. So very much in that conversation. And then we have obviously, for our community, we do have individuals that obviously work and live there in the community. So, Dean Andrews, part of the OSHA for the territory, is a great advisor with us. And we do have the EPA that comes on with us, and we have these discussions going back and forth. I hope that sheds some light on that, but we have very limited capabilities provided them, but we want to have very good communications and dialogue back and forth.
Thank you so much. And I see that our fearless moderator, Frendel Gerard, has rejoined the call. So Frendel, I am going to see if you're able to retake over the moderation of the panel. Are you, is your technology allowing you to do that?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good evening, everyone. And I'm on my phone, but if you check, I'm also in the waiting room. So power is back. So
Excellent. We
I'll
can
do.
overcome anything.
Oh gosh. And I did fortunately get to engage almost right away and see this. So now I'm gonna, oh, sorry about that. This is technology at work.
So we will see if we can get Frandel back. And in the meantime, I see Jane, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, is there any way in which we can provide more resources to the hospital? So that they would at least have some preparedness or awareness if there was a release. Even just having somebody who's either a PSM or a process safety management or risk management prevention plan expert, provide expertise on what the hospital should be prepared for. Like I don't even know if the hospital has any scuba gear, but when people come in and they've been impacted from anhydrous ammonia, they actually contaminate the hospital. So like they throw people who have been exposed into ICU units, and then like the workers in the ICU units become overcome with the fumes. So I don't because I don't have the RMP plan in front of me. I don't have any confidence that the hospital would actually be able to respond if you could get people that have been exposed to the hospital.
Hey, Jane, this is Director Josh, and One Affiliate Hospital does have a hazmat capability. They do have the tents to do the outside with hazmat conditions. Obviously, we'd have to have some liaison, with DPNR, with them to make sure that the assessment is done of what is coming in and do that triage. Like any emergency, depending upon the number, it's going to be a mass casualty. So the ability to bring in resources from other locations, whether it's from St. Thomas initially, or put that request in for federal partners or through state-to-state support, that would happen naturally from a natural emergency. But what you're talking about, I can spend some time with the hospital to find out what level of support do they have. But I know it's very limited, but there is a hazmat capability. There's a hazmat unit. They do some training on hazmat.
That would be really good. Some of the case studies I read were that hospitals, even that had hazmat units, were not informed about, because they were not expecting an anhydrous ammonia incident, right? It's actually fairly rare. And so that they brought these people into their ICU units, and then they contaminated the units, and then they literally had people in the parking lots, right? So I think that there's some things that we could do on the ground that were just basic, easy, fast, so that at least you could be more prepared in case there was a release. I would think that would be the very minimal that we could do here,
Right. I think also the distance away from the site also is a concern you brought up.
Yes.
We identify obviously upwind locations and establishing timeframes to do that, and triggers. And I always talk about drills and tabletops, and write those plans and go through that risk assessment like you're talking about, and what it would take to respond to that environment.
Right. You could have a lot of really sick people showing up at the hospital, and that could be the absolute worst place for them to be.
Exactly.
So that's something to really, and if you had your plan and you had your EPRA committee, right, this would be in the plan already, right? You'd have a separate triage site.
So, hi, everybody. I'm back. Director Joshin, as a follow-up on this conversation, are you prepared to do a tabletop and get everything in place as quickly as possible, given that we've known about this since November? We're not going to see the remediation process start until possibly February. could we get a commitment from you to begin that process?
The first comment is when we tabletop, we have to exercise against the plan. That's
Mhm.
number one. We don't get together and go, what do you want to do? So I think like Jane was saying, we have to develop a plan. We look at essentially what's in Port Hamilton's plan to begin with. What do we link up with our plan? And then we can start the tabletop discussion to bring the players together. But we work very closely with Department of Health, the hospitals, the multiple agencies, even our federal partners to come and do something like this. It will take some time to set that up, but we have to develop the plan, first of all, that talks about this. My TOP, if you will, the territory wise, we do have a hazardous material response plan already in there, but it's probably not to the level that Jane's talking about to talk about the specific high risk risk that we have in the island of St. Croix today.
And am I correct that one of the issues identified by EPA is that Port Hamilton does not have a plan?
That's correct. They don't have the, they were not able to show us a plan that of the sort that they're required to have.
So is okay. So I'm an old insurance person. So now I'm thinking there's no plan. Are we at a standstill, or is there a plan that had been created or that we can get from another source that deals with this issue that allows FITEMA and our other local agencies to begin creating their plan?
So Walter, from what I understand, there is a lot of anhydrous ammonia stored at the San Juan power plant. They may have an RMP plan that you can crib off of.
You're absolutely right. There are, I mean, we know how, there are other places that handle large amounts of anhydrous ammonia and they know how to manage the risk. Our number one objective is to get the anhydrous ammonia away so that there is no more risk. And that has to be done safely. The materials removal options report that the contractors have to provide to us have to address how that's going to be done and how the risks are going to be managed. That is a point where we need to be interacting with FITEMA, and we need to be figuring out not only what do we do if everything goes well, but what do we do if there's a problem, and that needs to be part of this overall plan that is going to be a plan for the removal of the material. It's not a plan for storing the material indefinitely. And how do you deal with that? It's a plan to get rid of the material, because that's the only safe thing that we've identified right now. They've got to get rid of it. They got to remove it.
Well, thanks. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so FITEMA has, I mentioned it earlier, this local emergency planning committee called the LEPC. We already have the meeting set up. We meet every 2 weeks. So I think this is something that we can take and bring on the table for discussion and look at a way forward. Trying to commit to a time frame again until we have a plan in place and we look at each person's responsibilities of that plan, being the local facility, if you will, the hospital, where health fits in there, where National Guard, where fire. And we'll find out very quickly. We're very limited. We run out of the capabilities very quickly. A lot has to go back to the communication. And I think, again, tabletop is something we can do all the time. It's easy to pull people together if you got the right subject matter experts. But again, we have to go back and get that plan. And I want to say it has to be an approved plan, not something we get to go down and just put together. So those are the challenges we have to come up with multiple agencies. And again, FITEMA is the coordinating agency to work with both local and federal partners. We'd be glad to take that on with the LEPC.
Thank you. And Director Joshin, R.A. Mendelson dropped a link in the chat regarding OSHA publication. So if, in the event you didn't see it, you can grab that.
3249. Got it. Yes,
Great.
ma'am.
Thank you. And we're coming up on time, even, well, we've got 20 minutes by my clock, but there've been a number of questions posed in the chat, and I'm going to try and paraphrase, but it regards the potential for the reopening of the refinery, since there's been quite a bit of talk about that. How does the permitting requirement, is it the PSD? I always get it wrong.
Yes, that's correct.
The PSD, is it reasonable to expect that the refinery could reopen within a year or a short time, given this requirement for the PSD permit? And perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on what, just a little bit, on what that permit process is.
So Lisa, when she made her initial remarks, she and Jen Valulis actually referred to this as well, that on November 17th, the EPA announced that the day before, on the 16th, the letter had been written to the new owners determining that a PSD permit is necessary before operations begin. And what we said at the time is that it would be the expectation that the process of applying for, getting the permit, and then carrying out what the permit requires to be done, that would be typically a 2 to 3 year process. Conceivably even longer, but that's the order of magnitude of time that we're talking about. The process is as follows. So that would be inconsistent with a startup in 2023 sometime. The process is that the company, the applicant, has to put forward a complete application. And the application has to identify the types of units that are involved, what their expected emissions are, there has to be an air quality analysis that say, if these are the emissions, here is what impact they would have in the surrounding areas. And those impacts have to be acceptable. And then they have to say, the point of the PSD program is that the facility would be utilizing the best available air pollution control technology at the time. The whole point of the PSD program is you have a facility that was built 50, 60, 70 years ago. Maybe it was built with control technology, air pollution control technology that was appropriate at that time, but a great deal of time has passed and technology has improved. So you've got to use the best available control technology now. And so they have to put all of that in their permit application. We then review the application to determine, number one, is it complete? Does it check all the boxes that need to be checked? Then we review the application to see whether we agree that if what they've identified as best available control technology, do we agree that that is the correct assessment of that type of technology? Ultimately, when we're satisfied that we can prepare a draft permit that fulfills all the legal obligations and is fully protective, we would issue that as a draft or proposed permit, and we would put it out for public review and comment. At that time, we would want to be very, very transparent with the community. We'd want to provide, I think we'd want to try and find ways to provide technical assistance, because this stuff is extraordinarily complicated. And we want to see if there's ways that we could provide the community with technical assistance so that they have a better way of understanding and therefore can comment in a way that is most effective and constructive. We get the comments, we review the comments, make whatever changes are appropriate in light of the comments, and then at some point we issue a final permit. The final permit can be challenged through legal processes, but at some point it becomes a finally effective permit. That's when the work to actually carry out what the permit requires has to start. So that involves, could typically involve the construction of new pollution control equipment or the enhancement of existing pollution control equipment. And so again, what we said in the letter and in the announcement is, this is a process that can take 2 to 3 years. It could, or longer. It could take hundreds of millions of dollars. We know that even setting aside the PSD permit, there is a one particular air pollution control system that needs to be installed in any event, irrespective of the PSD permit. And that's something called a flare gas recovery system. That's an obligation, a legal obligation that was actually triggered within the first month of the time that Lime Tree was operating the refinery a year and a half or 2 years ago. And that is also a pretty expensive and time-consuming process to design and build that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. There was a question, Jessica, question 20, I was going to, that was posed that the oil refinery has gone through two bankruptcies at least, changed ownership, and the community is left with significant health and environmental impacts and pollution. Is there a mechanism that the EPA or another agency can use that as a condition of approving any new operation of the refinery, the owners would be compelled to open and fund an escrow account to sufficiently cover the cost of cleanups of the hazards? And, you know, ultimately, why should multi-million-dollar companies be allowed to endanger us without monetarily guaranteeing remediation for the predicted problems?
It's a really excellent question, and I'm afraid that there's not a really easy or simple answer. But that having been said, a refinery such as this, if it's operational, generates hazardous waste, what's called under the federal law hazardous waste. And Hovenza did this, Hess Oil, Hovenza had that, and because they generated hazardous waste, they did have obligations under the federal hazardous waste law, which is called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, usually pronounced RCRA. There are obligations for certain types of activities that involve the management of hazardous waste, which do require the operator to have financial insurance for accidental events and financial assurance that there's enough money to clean it up after it closes. And in fact, in the context of the Hovenza bankruptcy, after Hovenza shut down the refinery, Hovenza was required by the bankruptcy court to create an independent entity called the Environmental Response Trust, I think is the name, if I have it right. A trust fund that was funded with very significant amounts of money. And that trust fund has continued the cleanup work that Hovenza was obliged to do to clean up the contaminated groundwater that is underneath the refinery. Why is it contaminated? Because during the operation of the refinery back in the Hess Oil and Hovenza days, oil ended up draining down into the ground and getting into the groundwater. So this trust that continues to operate a decade after Hovenza ceased to exist, this trust has been pumping up groundwater and separating out the oil and the water, cleaning the water, dealing with the oil separately. And that obligation continues. So that is an example of where a financial obligation survived the bankruptcy and continues in effect to this day. Now, I can't sit here and say that, oh, if and when Port Hamilton is able to return this refinery on again in compliance with environmental laws, whether there would be a sufficient mechanism to require a sufficient trust fund to be created. I can't say that that is the current state of the law, but there are some legal protections and they are important, probably not sufficient to respond to the question that was posed.
Thank you. Another question that's important and potential nightmare-ish. If in 2024 there's a change in administration, and are these requirements subject to change for the permitting? Could another EPA administrator or be responsible for and just do away with the requirements?
There certainly are, there are some flexibilities that that the political system allows. That is, as you have a change of administration and change of policies, there are some elements that are policy driven, but really what we're talking about here are things that we believe are driven by the law. And only Congress can change the law.
Wonderful. That's good news. Are there any other questions that I'm missing? We're kind of toggling between Google spreadsheets and the incoming questions.
Frandel, one interesting question was about the possibility for the chemicals to be removed to another on-island site. So like when we're talking about chemical removal, are we only talking about removal like from St. Croix, or are we talking about removal from the refinery to potentially another site on St. Croix?
I'll ask my colleagues to correct me if I'm wrong, but the administrative order that we issued that requires the removal of the chemicals, I don't believe specifies that the chemicals must be removed away from St. Croix and in fact away from the US Virgin Islands. I don't think it specifies that. However, the options that the contractors have to now develop and have to submit to us for our approval, those options have to be very precise about how the removal is going to be carried out and where the materials are going to go. I would be surprised if there was any sufficient local purpose for these chemicals. Certainly not the anhydrous ammonia. I mean, anhydrous ammonia is widely used. It's a refrigerant, and it has potential value. But I would be highly surprised if there was enough purpose for it anywhere in the islands that would be an appropriate step. So we will see what the options are. We will make sure that any option that we approve is one that is safe. So it's a little too early to answer that question explicitly, but again, I would be very surprised if that were to be the way things would go.
Thank you. I think we've run through most of our questions and just wanted to open it up for any last minute. We've got about 5 minutes with permission from R.A. Garcia and Mendelson, if we could add 5 minutes since we had the power crazies happen. I wanted to know whether there were any final closing statements that Mr. Mendelson, Director Josh, and Jane, and Lisa, I'll come to you last, would like to make before we wrap this important and very informative town hall. R.A. Mendelson?
Yeah, I just want to say, as I said initially, our inspection is still ongoing, and when it comes to a conclusion, we're certainly, just like in the last case, we'll issue a press release with our findings, assuming they're significant, and they're certainly of interest and newsworthy to the community. So we would certainly consider that worthy of a press release. We're continuing to work with our federal and territorial partners. Almost daily, I think we're dialoguing, my team with the EPA team on our findings. We have a sharing letter back and forth on our regulatory work between them. So we're certainly going to work towards that end. And, we look forward to the site being in compliance. That's everyone's goal here, is that the site is legally compliant for the safety of the workers, the public, and the community and the environment. So that's everyone's goal. That's why we're all here tonight and in general. So I'll cede my time, and we'll continue to work towards that end.
Thank you so much. We appreciate all of your efforts and look forward to staying informed. Director Joshin?
Hey, again, I appreciate hosting this and giving a chance to have great dialogue and discussion. I have a couple of takeaways I have to go back to some homework on, find about whether the water stoppage back in October, what caused that to the community, if it's going to come back up. Talk about some of the history behind what was happening at the facility prior to that, and of course establishing a way forward, developing some plans, and ultimately get to a tabletop. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come up as the territory representative today. Again, we are having some great partnership in the island with the federal partners and local agencies also. Again, emphasize our LEPC is up and operational. We have a handbook. We're going to invite different groups to come be part of that with us. We're still doing it virtual, but we want to get more of a face-to-face sit down. It covers not just the district of St. Croix, but also covers St. Thomas and St. John. So thank you for the opportunity tonight.
Thank you, Director, and thank you for always showing up. We really do appreciate it. And Jane, any final closing comments that you'd like to offer? Jane Williams? She might need to be unmuted, Jessica.
I have asked her to unmute, so perhaps we should move to
Okay.
Final comments from EPA, and we'll see if Jane comes back.
Fantastic. And as always, really appreciate Jane's input, and Walter, it's good to have you on board. Lisa, would you like to make some closing statements?
Jane just came back.
Jane.
Oh, Jane came back.
Yeah,
Jane?
just really thank you so much, everyone at EPA and OSHA. You know, I really appreciate you being on top of this. It is a very scary situation, and I just can't thank you enough. And of course, all my colleagues on St. Croix, I hope to see you in person one day. You guys are some very courageous people.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks for having our back. Walter goes first and then Lisa. Is that proper protocol?
Lisa is the one who can speak for EPA.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lisa?
Great. Thank you so much. And of course, as you can see, Walter is our encyclopedia on everything. So, so always appreciate being able to team up with him. And I think, Frandel, you had actually dropped off when I said this, but because there was the power outage, I just wanted to open it up and say, and I think Zeno Bain, who's on our team in St. Croix, also lost power. So just the open-ended invitation that if you didn't hear something or you couldn't log back on, you know, that people can continue to send in questions and we'll try to respond to them.
Fantastic.
Obviously. So I also just want to say thank you for this, for the opportunity always to communicate, to have this open dialogue. I also have some takeaways. One important one is how we continue to update the community and the public on everything that is going on. And we appreciate our partners over at DPNR and OSHA and VITMA. I can't remember all the acronyms, but it's so important that we all work together, because as everyone's saying, the most important thing is the safety and health of the community, of the residents and the members there. So we will continue our work to do this. We will make sure that you are informed along the way, every step of the way. And we'll figure out the best way to do that, as someone said, to keep those channels of communication open in the most reasonable way, or the easiest way for community members. So again, thank you so much, everyone, especially to Jen, Deanne, and Frandel for always just really being front and center and making sure that we are held accountable, because that's really our job. So we appreciate the time.
We really do appreciate your willingness and time. And since you opened the door, there was one last important question that is hit, which is given, do you see it?
Yeah.
Given the lack of transparency by the new owners with both the EPA and VI legislature.
So unfortunately, our regulatory system doesn't have a good faith piece to it, but we are on alert because of the situation that has happened here. So this is why we are, you know, as you can see, we had many members, we had our Caribbean office on, all the different divisions, because we are really paying attention and making sure that this facility is in compliance always. We had, we've been working with our partners at OSHA. So we will continue that work to ensure, like I said, that the people of St. Croix are just protected, and we really have the health as our kind of core center of focus. I was going to say to this other question of, so when I started this meeting, I said there's a lot of moving parts and they are on different tracks. So the order that we signed with the owners to remove the chemicals, that's going to move forward. That's an obligation that they have and they're going to comply with. And as Walter was mentioning, depending on the type of chemical, it may take, different systems to remove it and where it goes. So the timeline may be different on the different types of chemicals and when that is removed. The permitting and the question was about reopening, that's on a separate track. And we'll continue, obviously our regulatory obligation to review anything that comes in. So it doesn't affect the removal or the removal of the chemicals in that order. That has to move forward immediately. So I just wanted to make sure that.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that wraps it. Ryan has put a statement in the chat that perhaps Director Joshin, you might relay to our government employees, but just for the record, Director Joshin is here representing the government and the governor's administration. Commissioner Encarnacion had responded and unfortunately could not attend, and Mr. Callwood from DPNR is on the call, has been on the call. So they are getting the crucial information, Ryan, just so you know. I would like to thank everybody, the team that helped put this together, the St. Croix Foundation team, our fierce leader, Jen Valulis from St. Croix Environmental Association, and our fierce leader, Summer Sibley Brown, who has been at this forever. And ultimately, Deanna, love you much. Folks, I know that this is, I got yelled at before this thing started. This is not a witch hunt. This is not a gotcha for any elected or serving officials in the Virgin Islands government or in the federal government. And believe me, the federal government gets to hear how I feel. This is about informing the population of the Virgin Islands, the community of St. Croix. And please be assured that we have an open line to the EPA, and they are very responsive. I believe that the hotline is open on email direct to the EPA. So please know that for our community, you can ask questions, report incidences, and let people and get responses. We really do appreciate your transparency and your openness and willingness to engage with the community. Thank you all. Have a good night. And Lisa, hope to see you at St. Croix real soon.
Great. See you soon. Happy holidays, everyone. Really hope
Thank you.
it's a good new year for all of us.
And while folks, before you jump off, we do have a quick 2-question poll that I'm going to launch. So if you're willing to answer these 2 questions before you go, it just helps us for our organizing. And thank you so much.